By day 5 of fish-sitting duty, I had a body to hide and a cover-up to plan. My son Will stood at the front door with his camp duffel bag and pointed at me with the most serious expression a 10-year-old can make. He said, "Captain Finn is counting on you, Dad, and 2 weeks is a long time, and if anything happens to him, I will never emotionally recover." I promised him that Captain Finn would be alive and thriving when he got home. The first 2 days, I was a model fish parent, and I fed him every morning while drinking my coffee. Day 3, I had a big presentation at work and forgot. Day 4, I forgot again. Day 5, I walked past the tank and saw Captain Finn floating at the top of the water like a tiny orange surrender flag, and my whole body went cold. My wife would be home in less than an hour, so I scooped the body out with a coffee mug and flushed it, then grabbed my keys and drove to the pet store like I was fleeing a crime scene. I found the goldfish section and realized I had no idea what kind of fish Captain Finn was. I bought the one that looked closest and raced home and dropped it in the tank just as my wife's car pulled into the driveway. She walked in and stopped at the tank and said, "Did you clean the tank or something?" And my heart almost stopped. I said, "Yeah, I thought it looked cloudy." And she shrugged and walked away, and I stood there trying not to pass out. The next morning, the new fish was floating at the top, dead as a doornail. I flushed the body and drove back to the pet store where the same teenage employee from yesterday watched me walk in with visible confusion. He said, "Didn't you just buy a fish yesterday?" And I said, "That was a gift for my niece." And he said, "Did your niece have a funeral for it already?" And I bought another fish and left. Fish number 2 lasted 3 days before I found it belly up on day 8. I drove back to the pet store, and the same teenager saw me coming and actually took his headphones off like he was settling in for entertainment. He said, "How many nieces do you have, man?" And I said, "Several." And he said, "Are these fish being released into the wild or something?" He squinted at me and said, "Dude, I'm starting to think I should call someone." And I grabbed a fish and practically ran to the register. I bought fish number 3 along with a water testing kit and stress coat and treated that tank like an intensive care unit. Will FaceTimed me on day 10 and said, "Dad, can I see Captain Finn?" And I had to angle the phone so carefully I was doing yoga. He squinted at the screen and said, "Why does he look different?" And I said, "The lighting is weird." And he said, "He looks fatter." I said, "I've been feeding him really well." And he seemed satisfied, but I was sweating through my shirt. On day 12, my wife was looking for a pen in my work bag and pulled out 3 crumpled pet store receipts. She held them up and said, "Why do you have receipts for goldfish and fish medicine?" And I said, "I'm planning a surprise for Will, please don't ruin it." She gave me a suspicious look but put them back and I almost collapsed. Day 13, I woke up at 3 in the morning and walked downstairs in my underwear to make sure fish number 3 was still alive, and I watched him swim in circles for 10 minutes before going back to bed. I barely slept the night before pickup day because I kept having nightmares about Will crying and me being the worst father in history. I picked Will up from camp and he talked the whole drive home about his friends and the counselor who could burp the alphabet. But the second we walked through the door, he dropped his bag and ran to the tank. He stared at the fish and I could feel my heart pounding. He didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity, and I couldn't take it anymore, so I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Will, I am so sorry. I have completely failed you as a father." My voice cracked and Will turned around and looked up at me with about 6 different expressions crossing his face. He said, "Dad, why do you look like you're about to cry?" And I said, "Because I know how much Captain Finn means to you." Will's eyes went wide and he said, "Dad, stop, please stop. I have to tell you something." Will took a deep breath and said, "Captain Finn was already dead when I left for camp." I just stood there blinking at him like he was speaking a foreign language. He said, "I forgot to feed him the week before camp and found him floating 2 days before I left, and I didn't know what to do, so I left him in the tank because I was scared you would be disappointed in me." His voice got smaller and he said, "I spent 2 weeks at camp dreading coming home because I thought I was going to be in huge trouble. I felt all the tension drain out of my body, and I pulled him into a hug and told him that fish die sometimes and he wasn't in trouble." He squeezed me back and then pulled away and looked at the tank and said, "Wait, so whose fish is that?" I started laughing and he said, "Dad, how many fish did you go through?" I started laughing so hard I had to sit down. We named the new fish Mr. Guilty, and we didn't say a word to his mother about any of this, at least not until the plumbing got clogged up with fish bodies and she demanded an explanation.